Welcome, everybody, to the Now Moment Journey podcast. Kirsten Lovett here, shamanic coach. And I'm here with Merissa Lovett today, who is she's a shamanic coach and a shamanic practitioner and an ancestral healer and a vulva. And she just does a lot of different things. And I'm so happy she's here today. And I hope to keep having her on periodically as much as possible, because I love our discussions and I think that they'll be helpful for you. And if you have any questions, always feel free to, in the description, I always leave a link for messaging me if you'd like. So today is the 19th of December, just to let you know about what time it is. It's 2024, so we're getting towards the end of the year. And I guess I wanted to talk today about offerings. And, we talk about offerings throughout the whole year, but I think they take on a slightly different tone, maybe this time of year. But I think we can still talk about the things that happen throughout the year as well. But I know that this time of year is associated with remembrance for a lot of people. But I'd also like to take a step back and also say that I'd like to kind of mention this topic, that offerings, whether it's food in a certain tradition or even outside of a tradition, it could be tobacco, could be candles, could be runes etched in a candle. It could be like even something that you make, like a mask or something. It could be some kind of craft that is going to be a ritual object, or perhaps it could be a song that you specifically sing to a deity or a group of spirits, that sort of thing. Or there are other offerings that you could constitute as that. But what are all those things doing? Of course, they're invisible. So much of what we talk about in this podcast is invisible. So we have to kind of make sense of the invisible. But what are all these offerings doing? At the very least, they're doing a lot of things. But I think off the top of my head, first off, they're setting a channel of like communication and connection between you, the person, whoever's doing the offering, whoever's making the offering, and something out there. Like, it's a little easier to picture this if you're out in nature, maybe. But let's say you're outside and you decide to take a piece of your hair and blow on it, and then give it to maybe a body of water that you happen to be walking by, because you're taking a nature walk and you want to say thank you to the water or something. And so that's a way of giving a nature being your personal love and your connection. And I think it has to be done in some way, shape, or form. There's so many different ways to do this, but it kind of has to be done if you want that kind of connection. Let's just start with that. And because I know Marissa's got a lot of things to say, and so I'll hand it over to her.
Wonderful. Thank you. One of the things I really enjoyed what you just said, because that's such a powerful expression. I've been with you when you've done that, and it's always really special. And you get very quiet, and I can feel the connection between you and the land. It's very beautiful. I like being around it. I think for me right now, because there's so much stuff about ancestors coming up, what I've been delving into with both clients who come to me or people who ask me questions or in my own life is, when did we stop doing offerings as people in Western culture? And why did that happen? And there are certain offerings, like house offerings, that I think for some reason you couldn't get rid of. Like the tradition of leaving out a bowl of cream for the fairies, or porridge for the Germanic spirits, or whatever your thing is. I don't think you could get rid of those offerings. They were too woven into rural life to get rid of them. But the collective big offerings that people did together, I remember reading about the Anglo-Saxons, the King Alfred the Great, outlawing certain types of sacrifices in the Anglo-Saxon period. So this is like a period when Christianity is just starting to become really important in Britain, and like they're actually making laws saying you can't do it. So that's really interesting to me, because I think that's a part of the witch wound around offerings. And I do think there is a witch wound around offerings that kind of takes a couple of different forms. One, that you feel like you're stupid for doing them, or why do we have to do them? What are they actually doing? Instead of just accepting this is a part of like saying thank you, like when someone you say please and thank you, that's just a part of doing it. And then the other form, I think, is really worrying about whether you're doing it right. I think both of those are like different symptoms of the witch wound that was passed down from ancestors who gradually over time had more and more of those practices removed through the process of colonialization and modernization.
That's amazing. You really, thank you for verbalizing that into concrete words. That is just so, like, you've just read my mind basically. And it was interesting. You were talking about was it King Alfred? Is that who you were talking about?
Right, right,
I'm
right.
guessing that was like 500, 600, something like that, AD, or maybe
Maybe a
five,
little later, maybe a little later. He's in the Viking era. I can't remember when.
maybe 700 or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it made me think of the video, which I have on right now on my YouTube channel. Uh, I think the title of it is Why You Might Be Afraid to Make Offerings. And in that particular video, the reason I bring it up is because when Merissa was talking about King Alfred and forbidding people, if I'm saying this correctly, from doing offerings, I'm assuming,
right,
very much like the feeling that even when I was writing this, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago when I did that video and the paper, um, I still feel this wound. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever get over it. But the tree being cut down in, I think it was Saxony, Charlemagne sent his men to cut down a tree in like 700 something AD. I want to say 735 or 753, maybe something like that. Or it could have been the 770s actually. So don't, you know, it's somewhere in there. Um, those men were sent to cut down this tree, and it was Irminsul to these people, which I always kind of confuse with Yggdrasil, because I think maybe they're supposed to be kind of like this similar kind of thing, maybe, but we can talk about that later, but because I might be wrong about that. But long story short, it was a sacred tree, and not just to say that one tree is only a sacred tree. You know what I mean? I think we still had left over quite a bit of the interloping of both the Celtic and the Germanic tribes, both believing at the same time in not just tree worship, but a sacred grove, or you're gathering somewhere in nature in some kind of like maybe enclosed space that's naturally made of some sort, whether it's a grove or whatever, or it could be just around a tree, that's just massive, right? And that was very integral, you know. And so when you're cutting at that, it's like the equivalent, and this is very controversial for me to say this, but I'm going to say it. It's the equivalent of hearing the Native Americans say, you're taking away our blood when you poison the stream or the water. I mean, what's happening is, and we're water people too. I mean, we could talk about that as well, but I think maybe we'll save that for another time. But I think the tree is a very good example, because it's a lot like that wound of being prevented from doing something or having something being taken away from you by the empire, which that's like, what is that, 12, 1300 years ago now? And
It's a long time.
it's a long time, and I can feel that as if I was there.
Mm.
And the reason why we can feel it is because of a lot of things, epigenetics and all that stuff. But it's also because of like, we're still living in a empirical society that does these things. And only the trick is now, I will call myself a Eurocentric person. That's the easiest way to say it, because I don't want to say white. I want to say Eurocentric, because Europe is a vast place. But I think because those of us who are Americans, in this country, in North America, and you could say this about any Eurocentric person in any country other than Europe, right? They could be living in Australia, they could be living in, Thailand, they could be living anywhere. They're not living on the land that their ancestors came from. There's a much bigger wound there for them. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say bigger, but as big a wound as people who are suffering on their indigenous lands.
Mm.
And so, without getting off, because I know I left on a kind of a wound tangent, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And
I
so, and I'll let you pick up the reins here, but I just wanted to say, I think offerings, I know they're really hard to do sometimes in the beginning, depending on, there's different ways and different ways you can go around doing it. But I think they really, when you start to feel the connection of the spirit, you know, that whoever you're working with, it could be just the spirit of the land that lives where you live, where your house is. Like Merissa mentioned, house spirits. Maybe that's where you want to start. Just with saying, I want to say thank you to the spirits of the land here where I live. I want to do that in a way that's respectful and isn't, intrusive, but yet is honoring and something I can do comfortably, and it makes me feel good, and they feel good, and it because you feel a little more snug about where you are. And I just feel like that's an important part to healing the witch wound. Maybe it doesn't take care of it entirely, but I think it does help. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to get bogged down in like whether indigenous people are suffering more because I think it's a different type of wound. I think that fighting for your land is a completely different thing. It's very intense and I don't want to get bogged down in that. But what I do think is that for people who are settlers, who are who are also disconnected from their ancestral traditions, it makes rooting into something besides the culture very challenging because you don't have elders and this whole architecture of things that are keeping you accountable. And weirdly, the people I know who have that, whether they're indigenous or they're in a tradition or their families have always done things this way, they have a sense of independence that isn't dependent on what everybody else is thinking you're doing. Like the more rooted you are in your ancestors and the land and kind of that dialogue that's going on all the time, it gives you a strange independence, even though you're completely dependent on those connections. Because it means that the culture can't, I mean, you have to participate in the culture, of course, but it doesn't run everything, like everything isn't dependent on what you've heard on television or something like that, or social media or something like that. And I would say that offerings weirdly are the most simple, but sometimes for some people the most challenging. And the people that I've noticed that have the hardest time sometimes are the ones who've had the most trouble with their ancestors. It's not like it perfectly lines up. Like there are some people, you tell them one time how to do an ancestor altar, or like let's say that's their way of honoring their ancestors. Easy, no problem. They have it set up in like 3 days. They're working with it. It works. Everything's great. Other people, all hell breaks loose, because they have a very dicey relationship with their ancestors. Some people have to even go through like a spirit, like a saint or something that their ancestors were very close to. And that's their way of dealing with the ancestors. Well, it's the same way with offerings. There can be a type of trauma where people just start like micromanaging it. Like, is it okay to do this or that? And so that's why I think offerings around your home cut through all of that. You have access to it. Even if it's just lighting a candle, you have access to it. It's easy to dispose of. There are some offerings that have to be disposed of outside. What if you live on like the 25th floor of a skyscraper? It's very hard to get outside. So it's like sometimes you have to adapt these things to your circumstances, but that doesn't mean that you're not involved in all of this just the same as everyone else. And your offerings that you do, whether it's a bowl of water or a candle or whatever you do, or whether you go outside and leave, tobacco or cornmeal or a bowl of milk for the elves, for the fairies, whatever you do, it's part of that reciprocity that has to happen, that brings all the things that I think you were talking about, Kirsten, in the beginning. Like, what do offerings do in the first place?
I agree. There was a couple things I wanted to say. I think the reason I brought up the plight of what's going on with our society, no matter where you come from, is because I think people aren't understanding that while Eurocentric people in America have obviously benefited from extraction, yes, that's true, but there's a lot of pain in that.
Mm-hmm.
There's tons of Eurocentric people who have no interest in what Merissa and I are talking about. They probably would have turned this podcast off in the first 30 seconds. But if you're still listening, you're a Eurocentric person, or you're a person, a Native person, or a person of, indigenous background who is affected by the screwed up Eurocentric, current Eurocentric, because that's a whole nother topic. We could talk about what Eurocentric used to mean like 1,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago. And it was completely different, But long story short, in 2024, we're all part of this crazy society, right? So, like, even if you are completely, which by the way, I'm glad you brought up the point of somebody who is more maybe sure of themselves, because they are connected to their ancestors, whether it's in England and they're in another country now, but they grew up that way in that country, or they grew up in this country doing, or wherever they grew up, they just, it feels kind of like very safe to them, and so they don't have these kinds of problems. They have other problems, but not these. But that's a huge gift that most people don't have. And that's why Merissa and I are talking about this, and obviously we do things that are actually visceral, that help build this connection, instead of just talking about is important, I think, because it helps bring to the verbal, to the mental mind, okay, let me see if I can understand, what's going on here. But then you actually have to do something that's maybe energetic, or some kind of gesture that signals to the spirit world in a way that's focused, that says, I want to connect with you. Let's begin this process. It ain't going to be perfect. It ain't going to be, easy, but it's going to benefit both of us. And because let's face it, the spirits, they need us too. Mm. And the reason I'm able to tell you this is because I'm holding on to a stone that's deeply connected to an ancestor right now. So I'm able to kind of, hear that, because, and I'm just using my clairaudience. Now, I do a lot of things to get those things to work properly and whatnot, but I'm telling you that one of my goals for people in general that I work with, or who come into contact with my stuff or Marissa's stuff, is there's a lot of things I want to, show them. But one of the biggest things that I probably don't talk enough about is sovereignty, and like a spiritual sense of sovereignty. whatever that means for you. Like, if you can't depend on this society, which, let's face it, I'm at the point now where there's a couple institutions that I think might be sticking around, but let's face it, and could we ever depend on the society? I don't think so. I mean, not completely for all of our needs, right? There's a lot of things that have happened, at least in my life and in other people's lives that I know, um, that where the society doesn't take care of them and they're caught between the cracks. So, how do they become sovereign on their own? And I feel like developing a spirit relationship, it could be through a saint. I mean, I'm a little reluctant to talk about that because it's not really my wheelhouse, but there are saints that are related to pagan deities. So when you're praying to a saint, you're actually praying also to the deity that is connected to that saint, especially if you're talking about Europe, right? So like there's a Saint Canute, for example, in like Nordic animism. And jump in, Merissa, if I'm saying this wrong. But I think he's also kind of distantly connected to Odin, for example. You know, so that's just one example. And of course, another great example coming up in the next few months is somebody I've been thinking about a lot is Bree or Bridget or Breed, who's associated with Candlemas in February. And then, of course, a lot of people know about the Saint Bridget in Ireland and also in Scotland. And so, it doesn't really, I'm not going to get caught up in like whether they were a real person or not, blah, blah, blah. I mean, yes, that's very interesting in terms of like how it happened. But the point is that these beings are everlasting, they're omnipresent, so to speak. And they can be taken away from us, but they're never going to go away, especially if we feed them with offerings. And I know it's hard because I just want to say this because Merissa mentioned, people who have trouble with their ancestors. You may or may not know this about me. I know Merissa knows this about me, but there are plenty of ancestors who I have trouble with. And there are ancestors who I have a very good relationship with. And like, I didn't mean to have my phone go up into that anyway. That's that AI thing. Maybe that's the spirits saying, yeah, you can be a person who is like, I don't want anything to do with my ancestors. When you think of ancestors as being like people that were in your family that are passed on that maybe you didn't have a good relationship with, I totally get that. But there's, and this is Marissa's wheelhouse, but there is a group of ancestors maybe way, way back, or maybe not that far back. You never know. It could be 100 years, could be 1,000 years, whatever, that really want to work with you and like have your best interest at heart, and how you can get through to them is offerings. Sometimes it's tricky, and that's where Merissa might be able to step in and help out with a great deal of things that she does. And I think on my end, what I like to do is I like to do things like the offerings ends of things or the ritual. Like when I talk about tobacco, sacred tobacco sometimes helps me get the negativity off of me. That's maybe could be from ghost energy or ancestral, or it could just be from, garbage, day-to-day garbage from our screwed up society, or just whatever, or it could just be my own things that are coming up that I need to release or whatever. It could be any and all of those things. And I love tobacco so much because it as a spirit, it just frees me of those things so that I can either communicate or maybe, convey a message that's healing or whatever. That's not the only thing it does, but that's just one. And then of course, in return, what I like to do is when I have my cigarette during the day, I take a portion of it as an offering for Pachamama. And so that's the Andean being, like a mother space-time being, basically, or Mama Ipa, I guess would be Mother Earth. And so you'll hear me and Merissa talk about like anything from Nordic things to Andean things to Germanic things to Mayan things, because those are the experiences that we've had. But I also like to try to tie in a lot of the things that those different places have in common and the people from those places that still practice traditional wisdom. And even the Native Americans in this country, you could be hard pressed to find one, I've said this before, one group of traditional culture people, whatever group that is, that's still practicing today, that doesn't do some kind of offering. I mean, this is probably the one way that you, I hope I'm not getting off the subject too much, but I do want to say this. If there's a concern that you have as a Eurocentric person, whether you're in America or Europe or some other country, whatever, if you're concerned about like, well, there's a lot of shysters out there in the spiritual community. How do I know whether this person is, you know, integrity based, or doing something authentic to the point where it's not exploitative or whatever, how do I know? Well, I think one of the litmus tests you can give that person is find out if they talk about, and they may say it in a different way, they may not call them offerings, they might call them something else, or you might have to kind of find out if they do something to keep the relationship going, these spirit relationships, because I distrust people who do ritual work and don't do any kind of like maintenance. And that's what offerings are. It's a much more loving, it's not just maintenance, like I have to do this now. It's a loving thing. But all the traditional people that I've worked with, that Marissa's worked with, and I'm going to say this for her and you can, add to your own. I've never seen a traditional person not do an offering. They always do it. I don't care if they're from the Andes or from Mexico, from Nepal, even from Europe, they always do it. And so that's how I know, like, well, at least I know this person is making it a priority to keep the relationship going, whatever that relationship is. So.
Yeah, I feel that that's really incredibly crucial, and it's such a simple thing that I think sometimes people overlook it. But I really think that's part of the Western witch wound, because in um, in most societies, it's understood that not only is reciprocity, like giving offerings and receiving energy back in various forms, gifts from the spirits in the land, crucial, but it's considered to be the way that every conscious being can help make the world a better place. Like these exchanges of energy, reciprocity between each other, you know, um, and there are like little rituals around it. Like sometimes you share things like you give each other tobacco, or you give each other coca leaves, or you give each other green tea or something like that. But other times it's about like something you give to the earth, which is a type of offering. Like you let part of the field not be harvested because that's going to be for the spirits. But sometimes it's offerings too, even like something as simple as lighting candles, which are very powerful because they're actual portals. Fire is a portal that goes into the spirit world. So sometimes I think because they're so simple, people overlook it and think there has to be something much more complex. But a lot of times, like there's a couple of things that can happen when a person needs to kind of like up their game in terms of animism. One of them is you might need some kind of empowerment or healing work. One of them is, or cleansing. One of them is you might need to release something like a cleansing. But one of them is you might have to go through a period of really intense offerings, because the offerings are a way of saying your spirits may even demand this. And they mean like, and your spirits are saying, we want a stronger relationship with you. So for example, I follow the Mayan calendar. It's one of my things that I do. So I started, I've done it where I light a candle to it, and I've done it when I will light a candle and add something else, like maybe burn some copal. And I notice that when I burn some copal and light a candle, it's a much more powerful experience than when I just do a candle. That doesn't mean that everybody has to do it that way. It just works that way for me. And it's invited a stronger connection of those spirits in my life and in my work than if I didn't do it. So it's an individual thing. It's not necessarily like it's also a situation where the more favors you ask, the more offerings you tend to do. That's my experience.
That was awesome. Yeah, I loved what you said there. Like sometimes it's good to have maybe like if you don't know where to start with something, it's good to have maybe a template from somebody else. But then sometimes you can make it your own. And like you said, with the kapal and the resin and everything and the candle, and you just know that that configuration, that the way that that's together is something that's right for you, that brings in, I keep saying the word deity. It doesn't, it can be anything. It can be a spirit. It can be a plant spirit. It can be any kind of spirit, and, I don't usually talk about angels because I kind of consider them something else, but I'm talking about these kinds of nature spirits, plant spirits, animal spirits, stone spirits, deities from these various traditions, etc. But yeah, that's powerful. And also, I loved that you brought up I could almost see it in my head, the sheaf of wheat, maybe from a field. I have a video that sometimes I share around Thanksgiving that was taken in Cornwall. And if I can, I'll try to remember to put the link in here in the show notes to this YouTube. And it's of a society in Cornwall where they take, I think they do this in September, but it always makes me think of Thanksgiving for some reason. But they take the sheaf of wheat and the guy lifts it up and it's called, I think, crying the neck, like the neck of the of the wheat. And he says, I guess it's, what's Cornwall? Would that be Gaelic or something? I don't know what the he says something like Hunyar, 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 and they say hooray, 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 and he says the neck, the neck, the neck, and then they throw up their hats, and it's really adorable. It's like, and he's out there in the field, and you can see the different uh, small piles of hay, and he takes well, I guess it's wheat, maybe. I don't know. I'm not. But this points to another thing about Eurocentric traditional folklore and animism and such. A lot of these things, like Merissa said in the beginning, the farmers are really the last vestige, at least in this country, in the Americas. You got to go back to some of the old farmers, whether they're in, the Amish country or the Germanic people that settled in Pennsylvania or down in, North Carolina. You could, maybe in Appalachia or something like that. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other farm communities out west. I just don't know them as well because our people are mostly Northeast, Southeast, Eastern Seacoast people. So I tend to know those a little better. But a lot of those farm communities, if you go back far enough, they'll have like, some kind of remnants of things they did in Europe, and maybe that's another topic for another time too. But I'm just glad you talked about taking that last piece of wheat, and the way that maybe we do it here, like in our house, is we take a little bit of oak bran and give it to the earth. And let's say I might do that for a Nordic deity called Sif, but I might also do it for an ancestral helping spirit that's on one side of our family that I associate with writing, and she helps me write. And sometimes I forget that, and like, oh yeah, maybe she needs a little bit of like grain so she can help me write. I'm glad I mentioned that on camera because it'll get me to do it. Because I've forgotten about her for a couple months, and that's how it is with these people. They're invisible, but they will pop up and say, you remember when you used to give me, So I hate to wrap this up, but I do need to get to another appointment. So, but it's just been such a pleasure, Merissa. And can you come back again? Can we do this again?
Yes, I'm always very happy. Thank you for inviting me.
Is there something you'd like to mention to people before we go?
No, I'm good. Thank you for having me. And if you, uh, I'm sure that there are links, but please check out our free Facebook group and if you're interested, our Patreon, where Kirsten does a lot of amazing stuff.
And and Merissa does a lot of amazing stuff. We're actually, I'm not going to have time to post this before this happens, but tomorrow Marissa's doing a wild hunt journey, which is going to be super cool. And that's in the Patreon. Next week, I'll be doing a private YouTube that you can join for $1 a month. Maybe I'll be able to release this video, I hope, before that. If not, there'll be other videos coming up soon where you can join in. The free group is the Animistic Earth Medicine Facebook group. I will put a link for both that and the Patreon. And we'll talk again soon, I promise. Okay.
Thank you.
Blessings. Thank you, Merissa.
Blessings.
Hi, if you liked this episode today, feel free to like and subscribe to my channel and check out the other episodes on YouTube at the Now Moment Journey podcast, and as well as any other videos I have there. I have quite a few. I'd also like to invite you to a free quiz, which will help you figure out what kind of animal or plant or stone spirit archetype you are. And that's actually more of like to get you prepared for working with your own animal spirits, plant spirits, stone spirits, to build your own spiritual sovereignty so you can have your own personal spirit relationships. And I'd like to just show you something here. You can go to my link tree, which is www.linktr.ee/now moment journey. And you'll see here where I have some podcast episodes. And then you'll see getting to know your animal, plant, and stone spirit families class. That's about four buttons down. Just click on that, and that will take you to a page where there's a class, but just page down for the free preview. And that will sign you up to get the free preview, which includes video and also a free quiz. So if that looks interesting to you, I highly recommend you do that. Also, if you're ready to join a community of like-minded, like-hearted souls with myself and Merissa Lovett, we have a Patreon, and that's also on my link tree here, right beneath the animal, plant, and stone spirit families. And you can join that as a free member as well. If you'd like to join and support the podcast, and you get a ton of other bonuses. You get to participate in live streams, which include shamanic journeying and learning how to build relationships with plant, stone, and animal spirit families. We're also doing Nordic and Germanic ritual and ceremonial practices. I'll be talking more and teaching more about the runes. So that's also going to be included at the Patreon, and how you do that. And then also, just feel free to look at the other links on my link tree. I have links to other podcast episodes. And also, if you'd like to just sign up for my email list, that's down here, Shamanic Coach newsletter. And I'd also like to talk about our free Discord group, which is a discussion group for the animist practices for the Nordic animist year. So, like, let's say you're interested in Eurocentric practices, pre-Christian Eurocentric practices, ways for you to get in touch with the earth that's maybe through a Eurocentric pre-Christian vein. This is a really great group, and it's guided by some research by other authors, but it's a great group where a lot of us who have experience in Nordic animist ritual work, as well as following the runic calendar. And, even if you're new to this stuff, it's really fun. It's a lot of fun. So I encourage you to check that out as well. And so I hope you'll join me in any of those veins. even just signing up for the email list is great. And the quiz is a really great method to let you kind of find out what your interests are. What, let's say you gravitate more towards animals. What is it about animals that you gravitate towards? And it's more about the spirit, not just the specific animal. So these things have been with all of us, all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds for thousands of years. So I hope that you'll check that out. And in the meantime, wait for the next episode by liking and subscribing on YouTube, and you'll be sure to get the update. So hope to see you soon. Many blessings.